Well, thanks very much, everyone in attendance. This is the 9th in the series of Advanced Work Packaging Community of Practice webinars. We've been having conversations with the Middle East and with South America and also with Europe. So I think within the next month or two, you're going to see regional chapters cropping up around the globe. And we're pretty excited about that. Let me go over our vision statement for the community of practice. So we created the community of practice about 10 years ago, and the goal of it is to really create safer, more productive, value-creating project delivery. And we've been updating it as the advanced work packaging model has evolved. So it now starts right from design and carries all the way through to commissioning and startup. You'll notice that on this slide there is a link. If you are not already a member of the community of practice, we strongly recommend that you join. And you can do so by following that link. Also, our mission. We're really all about creating a community. And this community is virtual. In time, we know once COVID leaves, we'll also have some physical components to it. But at this time, it's primarily virtual. And it's really about organizations that want to improve the productivity of their projects, primarily through the use of advanced work packaging, but also other construction-related productivity initiatives like Lean. So very broad-based approach. And then I want to talk to you about a conference that's coming up. We're going to be having conferences in London on the 13th and 14th of October, and in Houston on the 27th and 28th of October. Those conferences will be both physical and virtual. So as you can probably guess, we're probably going to have a little bit smaller event than we've had in prior years physically, but if you add the virtual component, we're actually expecting that both of these events will be larger than they were in previous years. And we've got an exciting lineup. We've got programming that includes major global owners, major global builders, and major technology companies. And we're happy that Hexagon is one of those companies. So now to introduce the session today, we've got Scott Oskins, and he's going to be talking about Hexagon and some of the things that they're working on. So not to take up any more time, Scott, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks for having me, and thanks for allowing Hexagon the opportunity to present. And thanks everyone for joining. So today I'm just going to be having a little talk about balancing the big picture, and I'll say overall macro view of AWP and how Hexagon solutions complement and support that, as well as some of the more detail-oriented processes at the lower levels. So just a little bit about me. I came on board with Hexagon, and I'm with the PPM division, Process Power Marine, just a little over 3 years ago. Prior to that, I spent my entire career, 20 plus years, in the construction management arena in the energy and chemical sector. And I've had quite a bit of exposure and experience to the workplace planning and AWP that dates a little more than 15 years ago. So I'm happy to be here and happy to share some insight as far as that goes, and then also talk about exciting things that Hexagon has going in regards to our solutions and how that plays into the AWP goals and objectives moving forward. Before I jump right in, I wanted to take a quick minute for a safety or value moment, and it's quite relevant today, but just with a little different perspective. I know we're talking PPE and the things that are going on today with the pandemic. I used to give a lot of safety talks almost every day when I was in the industry, and I would almost say PPE for a lot of people probably didn't even realize what that stood for if you weren't related to the construction industry before this pandemic came across. So that's a bit of something new that's going across the world. But I wanted to share more, not just wearing the PPE, but the perspective behind it, and it's more about why you would wear it and why it's important. So there's a lot of parallels with construction, and I would say whether the perspective is you need to think beyond yourself. Whether you're working on site or whether you're talking about wearing a mask or PP or acting in a responsible and safe manner, it is, whether or not you feel that you're at risk or being safe. The point I would like to make is think beyond yourself. Think about other people and not just people that might be impacted by you not wearing a mask or your PPE, but if something were to happen, those around you that would be impacted, your family, your livelihood, your health, loved ones, friends, and possibly others that you may not be aware of. So when I used to talk on site about unsafe behaviors on a construction site, it was more about, it's more than just you. So the perspective is when you choose whether consciously to do something unsafe or not, don't just think about what might happen to you, or you think you're invincible and it won't. Think about everyone that could be impacted around you. So and the one thing I would say is, it's all about your attitude. Is, when I was always talking in the industry, I was talking about, well, how can we make things safer? How can we change the culture? How can we change the industry? Well, it's very tough, if you're talking to a bunch of grown adults. But one way that I can tell you can change the culture is through the next generation. So if you have children, um, and those around you, the next generation, you can definitely change that culture. And those children and the younger ones, they're watching, they're picking up on your mannerisms, they're picking up on your attitudes. So if it's something, so what I'd like to say is, simply wearing a mask, wearing your PPE as you go out, it's not that difficult to do, but it's all about the perspective and the attitude which you take that's behind it. Um, and if it's so simple as putting on a mask to wear out, and it could potentially make things safer or appear to be safer for others, is it that difficult of a task to take on for that effort? So just wanted to share some perspective before we move on about that. So keep that in mind. So now, just a bit about Hexagon, the corporate company, our parent company, about what we do. We're a technology solutions provider, and as you can see, we have offices all around the world and a global reach for that. We service a lot of different sectors: agriculture, mining, geospatial, geosystems, positioning intelligence, manufacturing intelligence, safety and infrastructure, and PPM, process, power, and marine. That's the division that I represent. And then as far as PPM, the division that I work for, as you can see, once again, we also have a global presence, global reach, and we spend an inordinate amount of money on R&D and investing in new technologies. Want to show you and go into this a bit before I go into the AWP is I'm going to be taking a holistic view of AWP and how Hexagon is uniquely positioned to support most all aspects of it. And I think many of you that are familiar with AWP will be very familiar with this slide, the surfboard. But I'll also, beyond this, later be taking a brief look at how we also support highly specialized workflows and work processes in the event that you might be looking for to fill specific gaps in your execution or your AWP plan. So, like I said, a lot of you may be familiar with this slide, and if you'll notice, what's important to note is AWP encompasses the earliest phases of a project, from setup and the initial strategy all the way through commissioning and startup and completions. So at the earliest phases, you know, strategies included, you have to include your work breakdown structure, your cost breakdown structure, how engineering in their execution strategy is going to support the construction, your deliverables, how long your deliverables go. So the one thing I'd share with that, and this from my years in the industry, is how many times you're on projects and you're at the tail end and you're doing lessons learned, for example. And I'll say more than 9 times out of 10, when you're looking at major problems, things that didn't work right, inevitably you can trace it all the way back to the earliest days of a project when most people weren't involved. Decisions were made, and I'll say the ship has already sailed on a lot of decisions that you had during the execution of construction and completions and startup. It was out of your control. So the wheels were set in motion by some very key and strategic early decisions, and I'll say maybe the AWP mentality wasn't embedded in those early strategies, and it set the course of a project on a bad path. So very critical to keep that in mind. And then the other thing I'd like to say is, you know, a lot of this seems like common sense to a lot of people for who have executed projects. And then why, when it comes to executing other and additional projects, we seem to recreate or repeat the same mistakes over and over and over. And I'll say that a lot of that to me is because the earliest portions of a project don't consider this end in mind, or the AWP mentality. So if you look at that, so that's the AWP surfboard slide. What you're going to see now is basically Hexagon's view of that same life cycle, and I'll say a little bit beyond, because this one goes into operations and maintenance, of all the solutions we provide across that same life cycle. So we have a very broad-ranging spectrum of solutions we can provide throughout that same life cycle of a project. And then also here's a look of, you know, the many products we have that support that across that same life cycle. As you can see, many of these are design-based, CAD-based, 3D, on into construction execution tools for project controls, smart construction, which is for work phase planning, on through to completions, and even into operations with some of the J5 technologies. So you've seen that, and I'll also be providing some insight into where PPM, Hexagon, we are as a division, some of our direction that we're heading. And I'll give you a glimpse later on in the presentation, where I'll show you a sample of just what we're talking about as far as investigating workflows and looking to provide solutions and supporting workflows seamlessly across multiple applications. So I want to show you this example, and just to give you some context of how complex construction organizations can be when it comes to um, all the different entities or the different departments that are involved. So this is just a quick visual of the typical departments involved in a construction organization. You know, you have project controls, construction supervision, materials management, your tech services or technical wing, safety, QA, QC, turnover and completions, etc. And what I'll say is each of those departments has their own set of drivers, even though they're all contributing to a project and the overall goals and objectives. And what I'll say to that is, you know, if you look at it, there's an overall goals and objectives for the project, and that would be, you know, to execute it safely, and, you know, and quality according to specs and standards, on schedule and within the budget, or hopefully better. And just to give you an example, I want to compare that to what many of you are seeing today with our government and with what's going on that you see in the news. It's no different than like what the government's doing. You have all these different entities. You got the CDC, you've got the Fed looking after costs. So CDC would represent health or safety, Treasury, and other departments. Same thing. The overall goals, you know, would be the American citizens. We're the shareholders or stakeholders in this, where you want, you know, people want to live safely. We want to earn a good living, have a nice quality of life. So a lot of the same objectives. But what do we see with all of these different departments? Although at the top, when you roll it up, you'd say the objectives are the same. But when you break them down, what you start to see is each of these different entities have their own drivers, their own sources of the truth. And sometimes it gets a little conflicting as far as, you know, whether or not they're rolling up to the overall goals and objectives. And in some cases, based on their individual departments and their own KPIs and drivers, they might not necessarily be complementing the overall goals and objectives. So I want to draw that parallel where it's much the same in a construction organization where you have all these different departments. In the end, everybody's got the same goals and objectives, but when you boil it down, the day-to-day of what the departments do, sometimes there's some minor conflicts with how they do their business with the rest of the other departments that are involved. So, and then if we take that, and I'm going to add even more complexity to that and say there's several different entities involved. And in most of these cases, each of these different entities between owners and contractors, fabricators, vendors, engineering, most all of these entities have these very same departments within them. So the challenge I want to throw out is, you know, as we look at this, they all have all of their different, potentially different applications and data and information that each of these departments and entities is responsible for. What we're really looking for is to gain this information and present it in front of people in a useful and effective manner so that they can actually make decisions and perform their work. And so it's quite complex, the dynamics of this. So, and I'm going to jump ahead to, okay, what does that mean? What does this mean about when I'm talking about all these departments? So if we jump ahead and look to, for example, a planner or someone that's in the construction, what we're talking about is the prerequisites or the information that is needed to be put in front of these people to effectively plan and package the work and execute it. So we're talking, you know, you're going to need engineering data, be it drawings or data. You're going to have schedule that gives you priority on your sequencing, material status, obviously, mitigating constraints, constraint management, and it helps to know your man-hour content. So when they're planning their packages, and then all along the way, you've got issues management between RFIs, design issues, NCRs, and the sort. So the whole key is taking that previous picture from all of these different departments, and in essence, you need to pluck out information in a seamless manner and provide it or present it to the construction planners, and I'll say the construction team, so that they have access and can see that information so they can make the decisions required to be made in a timely fashion. So the other thing I want to make clear is with regards to that, and before I get into this one, is the reality also is if whether it's a planner, whether it's a field engineer, a QC inspector, a crew supervisor, you name it, the chances or likelihood that any one of those roles or people is going to have access to all of those different applications across all these different departments is slim or none. And I'll speak even as a construction manager, even at the higher levels of management, you simply do not or will not have access to all of that information. Now, maybe you get a dump or a spreadsheet or a report that gives you a snapshot in time, but you do not or will not have access to all those different applications. And there's very valid reasons why they don't grant blanket access to people, because they want specialists operating within those applications. So that's a whole complexity in itself. So when we look at all of this, the different departments involved, what are we seeing here is each of these different departments can have multiple applications within them. You know, and I'll say project controls is probably the best example of that. You know, whether it's P6 or Microsoft Project, they're going to have some sort of scheduling application, um, a cost or budgeting tool. They'll have an estimating tool if they're not combined, and then something for earned value management, and then resource management. So several different applications within departments in some cases. So what is that? What that entails is how can we get access to all these different departments and applications and pluck out the, I'll say, relevant information for some of the users on a construction project so that they can make decisions in a timely fashion. So I will say this, you know, and I started out my career as a field engineer. You know, one of the things I always hung my hat on is not that I knew everything, but how resourceful I could be at getting access to information and getting it to the appropriate people as quickly as possible. But even said, if I could be very resourceful at knowing where certain information was and getting it, but there comes a certain point where there's only so many hours in a day and you only have time enough to track down certain amounts of information, and the rest, you're stuck with having to make decisions without enough information in front of you. And that's not a good situation where a lot of people, I'll say, are making decisions in the blind because they simply don't have the information in front of them to make an educated or an intelligent decision. So, and it's no fault of anyone. And the sad fact is that the information is out there. It is out there. There's tons of data and information on these projects that exist. And all we're talking about is how can we get the proper access to that information and put it in front of these users. So what does that mean in the whole thing? And I kind of alluded to some of that, which is, what are the challenges in all this? So there's a lack of visibility. So if you don't know where the information is, you don't have access to it, or you simply don't have enough time to go through the motions to get to it. The other thing that is quite common on projects is you get inconsistent information. You get multiple sources of the truth, or you get different applications that are working on different synchronization of time as far as when they get their updates or their dumps, or they provide it in snapshots to different consumers. And then the biggest thing is you have ineffective management of change. So what I would say is in most cases, when you draw up plans for a project, I don't want to say they're perfect, but if you could execute them in the manner at which they're originally drawn up, life would be easy. But when all the change and it comes up constantly, that are dealt to projects, people get lost in the change. People lose the ability to calculate all the different permutations and understand all the effects of certain changes or things that occur. And then the other thing, like I said, is uninformed decision making, which is where if you simply don't have the information and you're forced to make decisions without any information. So you're going with gut reactions. And that, quite simply, is, is a huge risk factor for executing on projects. So from our perspective, what are we talking about? And I'd say this: think early, and this is a key thing. Is as early as possible, strategies need to be employed. And the other thing is when you're doing early planning, for example, CWPs and your WBS structures. If you're thinking through the lens of, let's say, work-based planning or packaging, in most all cases, when we're talking early phases of the project, these tools aren't even thought of or stood up or not in on a project. So the point is there's other tools, and it could be design tools and procurement tools, that you need to take this early planning concepts from AWP and the packaging and embed them, and or have at least have the capability to embed those concepts within these other tools, and for when the planning tools do arrive and are stood up on a project, that you can seamlessly transfer that information and those groupings and whatnot to those packaging applications. So that's the one thing, is the earlier the better, because once decisions are made, and the ship has already sailed, it's too late. You can't create things out of thin air that are, I'll say, requirements for work-based planning or the AWP methodology if they were never thought of or conceived from the beginning. So that's critical. The other thing I'd like to say is think little. So if you're looking, we have a lot of very detailed, specialized work processes and workflows embedded in our tools. So, even if you're well along the path and you're looking for some minor tweaks here and there, we have a lot to offer as far as that goes. And then lastly, think big, and that's where Hexagon really comes in. Is we have the big picture, and I'll say the complete holistic view of solutions, to where we're actually even capable of, in-house being able to look at combining workflows and things and presenting them in a seamless manner to different construction users or operations or completions and systems turnover and the likes of those. So not only thinking early and little and big, I want to talk about, it's time to not just think about it, it's time to act. Those that sit around and do nothing are going to get left behind here. So, we've got a full suite and we're really strong on the design end, as many of you might know. The products that support feed and detailed design, and we have a lot of functionality and capability that can support AWP from that standpoint, and it needs to be done, and as well as through the construction phases of the project, where we can reduce risk from projects, procurement, materials, fabrication, construction, and then lastly, from the completions and on through into operations. So for that, and then lastly, I want to walk you through this. So I've got a little sample of what we're talking about here to show you. Now, this workflow isn't specific for AWP, but I'll give you the pretext on it. This workflow that I'm going to show you is a maintenance inspection that's going to occur on a level control valve. But the point I want to make is to show how it walks through a full work process, let's say for a maintenance inspector, and provides all the pertinent information this person needs or this role needs to perform his duties. So as you can see, it starts off with the planning. They've got 2D drawings and design information. There's a work permit or the work order that's in there. There's operations data that's put in front, and this is all going to be in a mobile format for when this guy is on site and performing, has access to all the pertinent information. You'll see here there's info maps, and walks all the way through. There's a true view of what it looks like in real life. So what I want to stress here is, like I said, this isn't a work packaging environment, but what you just saw there, it looked kind of intuitive and quite simple. But what I'll tell you is when it comes to today, there's 4 different products that are applications that were involved here. There was the design engineering data that came from our SDX operations. There was some J5 operations management technology, and the OSI Pi that provided some data history, and then also work order information from SAP. So the point is this is the type of vision that we're looking to move towards, is to get beyond applications that are supporting individual departments for their own needs, but actually utilizing that data and plucking it and providing seamless workflows in front of the real users, the real people that actually need this information on site. And that has an inherent effectiveness and efficiency and improve on productivity for these people, because obviously if you have this information in front of you at the touch of a finger, it avoids all of the time it takes to go gather up or open files or access different applications to perform their work and their duties. So in a lot of cases, like I said, with things happening on the fly on sites, a lot of cases these people don't even have time to go access this. So providing it in a seamless fashion is huge. So I want to wrap this up real quick and say, so what are we talking about here? So we as Hexagon, I believe, are in a unique position to provide solutions, AWP solutions, throughout the life cycle of project and beyond on into operations. And what I would like to say is I believe our solutions-based vision very much aligns with the AWP principles and what is required for moving forward into the future and what that entails. And then lastly, I'd like to say, regardless of where you are, whether you're just entering the realm of the AWP journey, whether you're mature, there's definitely things that need to be done. So I challenge you to reach out and act on improving wherever it is you are in your process. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for listening in, and I'm going to open up for some questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. I would like to encourage everyone to please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions to Scott. You can also use the chat, but we prefer the Q&A. You'll find it on your attendee panel. We actually have a question here submitted by Jeff Hoots. Apologize if I got your last name wrong. Can Intergraph Smart Materials Can Intergraph Smart Materials identify material constraints by CWP at or while material is getting bought, so problems can be solved before material hits the field and it's too late? In other words, can material planning be done in the home office?
I can answer that. As far as smart materials goes, I'm not aware of any direct functionality in smart materials, but we do have that in smart construction. So talking different application where we do have a very robust and very detailed constraint management functionality within it, and materials is a big portion of the constraint monitoring. So if I were to substitute that with smart construction instead of smart materials, I would say the answer would be yes.
Okay, perfect. Hopefully that helps, Jeff. You can also join us on the AWP Community of Practice LinkedIn group, and there'll be a thread there with the recording of this webinar that you can, post additional questions for clarification there as well. Scott, I would like to ask your perspective from both a technology and AWP SME standpoint. Based on your experience, what are some of the most challenging aspects you've encountered in implementing work-based planning or full-scale AWP?
Okay, well, I think in my personal experience, I'll say it's keeping the train on the track. So my experience has been um, in trying to implement, and I say that, and I can go back to that slide that has all the different departments on it that I showed, is you're in essence dealing with several different department managers with their respective applications, and you're trying to pull in or integrate data from their respective departments and applications so that you can present this in front of your planners and the construction team. And the challenge is they not always fully understand the concept that you're trying to achieve. And at the same time, you have to understand that they have their own drivers and KPIs and what they're being held responsible for as important within their departments. And they don't always align with what you're trying to achieve from an AWP perspective. So when I say trying to keep the train on the tracks, it's inevitably you keep seeing things pop up within different departments where they're making decisions that are, I'll say, they make decisions that are in the best interests of their department and their applications, but not necessarily always in the best interest of the project, or I'll say the AWP concept. So that's difficult, and there's not always a good sound understanding of the concept, and you don't always have the buy-in from these I'll say different department managers. And then the biggest thing that I could say that really impacts things is change and management of change, or the difficulty or lack of change management. So once change is involved, when you're trying to negotiate keeping everything in sync and all your different applications lined up in your data and information, once change comes in, it becomes much more difficult. And once again, trying to negotiate that across multiple departments and applications. So I don't think that will ever just go away overnight. Certainly there's a lot to be done to improve in that area, but I'll say those are the two that quickly come to my mind when it comes to challenges.
Okay, so I think the answer to my next question was sort of couched maybe in the response you just provided, but I'm wondering if you could tell us what the most important aspect is from your point of view to successful AWP implementation.
Okay, to me, without a doubt, it's executive level buy-in, and I can go back to that question I just answered. So if you're in, like I said, trying to negotiate between different managers, you're almost at a parallel level. And if you come at an impasse where you're requesting certain information or things to be done from different departments, and if you come to an impasse, there needs to be enforcement, and that has to come from above. So I think the first thing for successful implementation is you have to have executive level stewardship and buy-in, and not just buy-in to where they're saying, yes, we're going to do that, and that's kind of the end, and they come back from time to time and check. I'm talking about day-to-day enforcement. So when these things come up, you need somebody at a higher level that has the authority to enforce the AWP goals. And that really comes down across all these different departments that I'm talking about.
Excellent. We have a question from Tiago Fernandez. How useful is AWP for completions management, for example? Wondering if you can give us your perspective on that.
Well, I think in the whole perspective of things, it's all about completions. I mean, you know, there's another term we say it's all about materials, but really in the end, you know, we do all of this work packaging and everything to support crews, and I'll say it's more area based and geographical based. But at the end of the day, we're really supporting the successful startup and turnover by the systems, right? So the answer, the easy answer is that's the most critical. The whole question in that is the conversion from, let's say, the CWPs and the IWPs, those packages which are more geographical based, and then the transition over to the eventual system startup. So it's very, it's not tricky, but the focus needs to be on how you can have that transparency or have the information by system as you're planning by area, and have all that information in front of you so that when it comes to systems turnover, you don't have some gaps in your execution that didn't support the priorities that you're supposed to hand over. So I'm not sure if I directly answered his question, but it's of utmost importance. So because that's really the end goal you're looking for. So I can't see, you know, you're hard pressed to take any one piece of the pie out. But if I'm looking at it, I'll say in the end, it's all about completions, because that's really all that matters to the owner. And you know, what do they say? The last impression is the lasting impression, and it's all about completions.
And Tiago actually, he tagged a little extra info onto the question. Does it encompass systems and subsystems?
Absolutely. So I can tell you what we're working on right now internally is with smart construction is integrating with our smart completions, to where once they have systems, subsystems, test packs, and loops identified, we want to be able to run those graphical filters and display that in construction, so we can see in terms of systems and subsystems how we're planning our packs, how they're getting installed, and then visualizing or seeing or noting the gaps that may not be getting executed according to the systems package or the subsystems.
Okay, great. And Tiago, again, if you would like to get further clarification or expansion on that, please join us on the Community of Practice LinkedIn group, and we'll have a chance to chat with Scott a little more, and others in the community that may be able to shed some light. I'm wondering, Scott, what easy gains can you see today that construction companies can be looking at to help improve efficiency or productivity?
To me, and this gets a bit outside of the packaging, let's say, but if I look at just productivity and efficiency, you know, to me, the quick, easy gains are taking the highly redundant tasks that crews are performing, let's say on a daily basis. For example, every crew and for every person has to fill out a timesheet. Every crew, I believe, does a pre-job and safety meeting at the beginning of shift, and sometimes at lunch or breaks, at the end of breaks. Most cases, there needs to be a manpower, a force report turned in, and for supervisors, there's like daily journal. These things are daily and run across multiple crews. So my observation has been, and I've been out of the workforce for 3 years now, but is these tasks are still highly manual. They're filling out pieces of paper, turning them in. So if we can digitize these tasks and put them in a mobile tablet to where they're entered once, they don't have to march these in, turn them into someone in a trailer, and then they get keyed in again, but they're in once. And the other thing is they're highly redundant tasks. So these are quick, easy gains that I see, let's say, to improve efficiency, period. Whether you call that under the umbrella of AWP, but I think we're all aligned as far as the goals and principles, which is we want to streamline the execution of construction and completions. So that to me is the easy gains that I can see.
So it's Lloyd here. I just have a question for you, Scott.
Mhm.
CII is definitely moving in the direction of trying to increase the visibility of the supply chain. And I'm curious how the Hexagon solutions do that, but also what types of constraints can be visualized through through your tool. So is it just materials, or is it progress, or what does it include?
Okay. So first things first, I'll address it from a material standpoint first, Lloyd, and then I'll get into the different constraints that we can track. From materials, and I'm speaking for Hexagon, we have a very mature and robust materials application, smart materials. It's one of the industry leaders. What I would say as a construction SME is that's our most important integration, because to me, without materials, and I'll say you couple that with schedule, if you're looking at execution, those are the most important things a planner or anyone needs insight into. So what we work on for construction, smart construction, is a robust integration with smart materials, to whereby a planner can go in, and this is a real-time view and not just a snapshot in time. It can be run real-time with APIs, where a planner can see material status by component or by commodity code, and then it usually gets rolled up or summarized at a BOM level. So there's real-time material status that can be shown, whether it's an ETA that's given, whether it's received and when it's received, and then all the way through issuing to the construction site. So that's on the material side. As far as the constraints tracking goes, Lloyd, we have a very detailed module within construction, smart construction, that users can log constraints at the component level, and materials is one of them. And it's, if a material or a certain component is not available, a constraint goes against that component, and above and beyond that, you still have visibility to see what's the current ETA that it's expected on site. You can see ROS dates and things like that. Other types of constraints that we allow, I'll say we have major categories, and that would be engineering constraints, and it's mostly focused towards documents or drawings, whether or not they're IFC status or not. That's a pretty simple one. We have one for materials, a category. We have it for scaffolding, if scaffolding is required. We have some future plans envisioned for that. And then let's say construction equipment like cranes and man lifts and other, compressors and things like that, that are prerequisites to installing or performing work. And then we have, I'll say it's kind of a catch-all, it's an other category, where things like if you're in a brownfield environment, I'll say one of the subcategories for that is like a work permit, or if there's a permit required. And then it's really another category where the user can go in and basically type in any type of constraint. So it's broken down into categories, and they all roll up to, you can do reporting and roll-ups at the IWP level, you can roll them up to CWP level, but what I'll say is they go all the way down to the individual components. So that, and I think this goes back to the first question, that is a functionality in smart construction and not materials, and it's more broad-based. Did that cover your question, Lloyd?
And Lloyd's just muted. Give him a chance to respond.
I think I put him to sleep.
Sorry, that was exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. So Scott, I hate to make you repeat yourself. I have a feeling that this next question has probably already been answered in one way or another in a previous response. But so far you've spoken on the most challenging aspects and the most important aspects of successful AWP implementation. And I think that provided some great takeaways for the attendees today. I'm wondering if we can continue that sort of thread, and if you could tell us what are some of the most important things someone looking to employ AWP or from an application standpoint?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned that earlier. To me, if someone's to start, and this is kind of bare bones construction fundamentals, is it's the schedule and materials. It's all about materials. So if you're looking, whether you're doing CWP work packaging and on into IWPs or anything, you need to know a priority of what it is and how you're going to execute it. And then obviously you can't install anything if you don't have the materials. So if I were to start, I'd say right out of the gate, I'm focusing on a schedule integration or putting that in front of my planners, as much materials information in real time as I can get it. And I'll say that, at least as far as smart construction and PPM, that is our focus. We always want to make sure that those two integrations or interfaces are robust and are most important, and then we continue to build from there, obviously, with other applications. But certainly I would say, and this is as an SME, not as a technical person, I always start with your schedule and material availability in our industry.
Okay, well, maybe we'll just pose a question to the audience at this time and just say, what do you think about what you've heard so far? Are there any points that Scott made that you maybe want a little elaboration on, or is there anything you'd like to throw in even as a comment? We've got about 8 minutes remaining, and maybe Lloyd, did you want to just remind folks how they can get more information about the community of practice while they think about their last questions here?
Sure. So if you join the community of practice, we'll be sending you information on how to link to sessions that have already been run. So you'll be able to see those on YouTube. We'll be responding to questions that get placed on the community of practice website, and we'll also be updating you on developments on the global regional sites that are going to be established in the Middle East, in Europe, in South America, as well as developments that are happening in North America. So joining the community of practice is probably your best starting point. I think the other thing I'd like to say is I've been involved in advanced work packaging since 2003 on the development team for work phase planning and on the RT that developed advanced work packaging. And so in the years that have transpired since the advanced work packaging came out in 2015, I've got to say it is amazing how the tools to support this have advanced. And the Hexagon tools have really come an enormous distance from when they released their first tools back over 10 years ago. So if you get an opportunity, I strongly recommend that you reach out to some of the Hexagon people and get some more information. I did have one question for you, Scott, and that is with the self-quarantining, social distancing, people working from home, what's that been like for Hexagon in terms of supporting people that aren't necessarily working in their offices the way that we historically would be?
Well, as far as Hexagon goes, it's even though it was a shock to everyone the way it's come on, it's been a very good transition, I'll say, for us. Obviously when there's some personnel, maybe more on the sales side, that obviously there's advantages for face-to-face interaction. But I'll say from a company standpoint, a lot of people already work virtually and do a lot of their work not in an office environment. But I'll just speak for the groups that I'm involved in. It's been, we haven't skipped a beat as far as the meetings, the interaction, the communication, and me personally, I probably have seen an uptick in my productivity working not from an office. So I think the adaptation has been very well, and I even almost suspect that moving forward, when things get closer to reopening and back to normal, that some of the company might be shifting more to virtual based and out of the office, that it's worked that well. So I would not be surprised to see that. I'm hearing some chatter, but nothing officially. But to me, that's a testament that the higher levels of management are seeing that things have worked out very well through these times.
Well, thank you so much for that, Scott. And thanks for taking the time to do this presentation for us.
Sure.
Steve will be posting the presentation. It was recorded, and we'll be posting it. And then there'll be a link from the Community of Practice website for anybody that wants to see it, or if you have peers that you want to direct there, please do so. Again, thank you so much for doing this, Scott, and thank you so much for everybody that attended today.
Sure. Yes.
We will now shut down the webinar.
Thank you.